Give me liberty or give me Immanuel Kant. Welcome back to part 3 of Immanuel Kant. We'll close out the groundwork in discussing Kant's view of autonomy, and we'll start to get into more of his metaphysics as well. The links to the other 2 parts are in the description. There are 2 section headers in chapter 2 that are really useful to start to understand Kant here. The first is the autonomy of the will as the supreme principle of morality, and the second is the heteronomy of the will as the source of all spurious principles of morality. Kant loves big words, so definitions are important. Autonomy is self-rule, and heteronomy is other rule. So, Kant thinks that true morality is only from a position of freedom, and any other source compromises your freedom and degrades morality. This should remind you of these essential qualities. If morality is from the outside, it's tougher to have accountability, and freedom is limited by that outside force. The only constraint that Kant thinks can be moral is a self-imposed constraint to the dictates of reason. As a shorthand, Kant's understanding of autonomy is very likely close to your idea of free will. However, this doesn't mean the other side is determinism. We should understand its opposite to be that you must believe that free will and morality are distinct, and generally that morality advocates restricting your free will. A more accurate way to understand this is that freedom is morality. Kant says, therefore, a free will and a will under moral laws are identical. Likewise, we can understand heteronomy as willingly choosing a certain type of bondage, and immorality would be using your free will to go outside of this bondage. Kant thinks there are 4 ways to disagree with him: physical feelings like happiness, a special moral feeling, rational perfection, rationality being something humanity has internally, or a non-rational, independent perfection, such as the will of God. He also opts not to grind through why these 4 are wrong. In general, he thinks that these 4 must be processed by our preferences or our reason in a hypothetical way, which means they're all hypothetical imperatives and not categorical imperatives. Kant bluntly states that free will is presupposed within the idea of rationality. This is because reason does not coerce the will, but only informs it. The will now can act with that information and without coercion. If you think you're rational, then Kant thinks you must also think of yourself as free. They have to go together. With that, Kant moves on to why should I be moral, which might be better titled, how do we justify that presupposition? If some interest compels us to that presupposition, that immediately becomes heteronomous, and Kant would reject it. Kant thinks we need to ask, on what grounds is the moral law binding? He has already defined morality and freedom as self-legislation, so they can't be used to support each other without begging the question. He starts by making a distinction in the way we know things. We have knowledge of experience and knowledge of a thing in itself. His initial example is seeing my arm moving and intentionally raising my arm. Kant thinks that this distinction reveals that there is a sensible world and an intelligible world. Within the sensible world are the things of the material world that we discover through our 5 senses, through our body, and the deterministic system of cause and effect. In particular, he thinks that the sensible world is heteronomous. When my eyes are open, I don't choose to see or choose what to see. It is automatic, and my senses are governed by whatever is outside of me. The intelligible world has things like reason, the mind, and understanding. Effects are in the sensible world, but we understand their causes. The mind, likewise, is conceptually distinct from the body, and reason, of course, is very different from the senses. This world is autonomous. You choose to reason. The mind is not enslaved by the effects of the world, and causation itself cannot be directly seen, but is only accessible through an intuition of the mind. By the way, this gets much more complicated in Kant's other writings, and this is heavily simplified in the groundwork. All the details of the noumenal and the phenomenal are not needed and not mentioned in the groundwork. Now, which one is you? Which world has personal identity? Kant thinks that you are here, and of course, in this same world is ethics. So, reason, your mind, understanding, and ethics are all in this intelligible category, and all are autonomous. This means that Kant thinks that the only way to conceive of you, because you are rational, is to think of yourself as free. Kant concludes, as a rational being, and thus as belonging to the intelligible world, a human being can never think of the causality of his own will except under the idea of freedom, because reason must always take itself to be independent of the determining causes of the sensible world, and that independence is what freedom is. Okay, big summary working backwards from how Kant writes the groundwork. You exist, and you're in the intelligible world. That intelligible world also includes the rest of the non-physical world, reason, understanding, ethics, etc. The sensible world may always be governed by outside sources, but the intelligible world is inherently free. The only competing principles against autonomy are all hypothetical imperatives and heteronomous. The categorical imperative must be followed because you're rational and ought not act against your inherent freedom. Any prescribed actions are only right when all rational creatures can will that they be universal laws. Wrong laws will either contradict in nature or contradict in our will if we try to universalize them for all people in all contexts. Compromising our faculty of will likewise compromises the categorical imperative, and that in turn compromises the moral worth of the action in question. Acting from duty alone and according to duty alone is the only uncompromised will. This is the good will, and it's good because of how it wills, not if it successfully accomplishes some goal. The how is whether it adheres in freedom to the duties of the categorical imperative, and the good will is the only source of moral value. Does anyone else's head hurt? This is the end of the groundwork. There is so much more to Kant, but I need to take an aspirin or two before I do any more videos on this guy. Stay tuned for other deontologists who, in one way or another, disagree with Kant's method. As usual, thanks for watching.